This is Kim Paffenroth, author of Gospel of the Living Dead, and you are listening to The Graveyard Show.
Welcome to The Graveyard.
And you are listening to the Graveyard Show podcast, and I am your caretaker, and the graveyard is open. Well, hello, everyone. It's great to see all of you here inside the graveyard once again. It's been quite a while, and certainly no fault of yours. I just got really comfortable doing nothing these last bunch of months. I uploaded my last podcast, which was my interview with Judith O'Day, Barbara from the original Night of the Living Dead. I uploaded it in early October in time for Halloween, and then that was it. It was Halloween, then it was Thanksgiving, then it was Christmas, New Year's, and then we're into January, and now I'm like, wait a minute, what month am I in? And here we are in March. So it is so good to be back. It is so good to have all of you back inside the graveyard. Apologies to all of you out there that have downloaded the show and are kind of wondering what the heck happened. Well, like I said, I did get very comfortable, and I'm not on a timeline anymore, so there was no hurry. Although there are some out there that are really pushing me to get back into the game and start doing original interviews, which, to be honest, I'm kind of leaning towards myself. So I thought, following up on my last show with Judith regarding Night of the Living Dead, I thought, why not stay on topic and revisit my interview with author Kim Paffenroth, who you heard at the top of the show. He wrote this great book on the first four Romero zombie movies, Night, Dawn, Day, and Land. And the name of the book is Gospel of the Living Dead, George Romero's Vision of Hell on Earth. And he joined me all those years ago to discuss the book as well as the films themselves. So, disclaimer, or as we say nowadays, spoiler alert, we're going to be talking about everything in these movies. So if you haven't seen any of them or some of them, if you're planning on seeing them, just be forewarned. I will do this not only for this podcast, but for the next two that Kim will be joining me on. So let me give you the setup as to what's happening. So this interview with Kim is the setup interview about the book, why he wanted to do it. We talk a little bit about religion and how it relates to Romero zombie movies. We even actually discuss a little bit of Diary, which was out. It had just come out, I believe. And we kind of discussed that, even though he didn't have that in his book. We kind of talk about it just a little bit. And then the next show will be our discussion about Night of the Living Dead and then Dawn of the Dead. Then the third part of this will be the two films Day and then Land of the Dead. So I didn't want to just try to cram it all in one interview. I thought it would just work better over the three, which he actually did join me for three separate interviews. So you're about to hear the setup right now. But before that, if you want to reach out to me, the email address is gyspodcast. That's G as in grave, Y as in yard, S as in show, gyspodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear from you. Any thoughts, suggestions? And I want to send a shout out to my friends overseas. I've been checking my podcast numbers and downloads, and I want to say hello to you in Japan, in Canada, in the UK, in Spain, or as I call it, España. Hola, ¿cómo está? That's about it, and it's not very good. Sorry. I just want to say hello to all of you outside the United States for downloading the podcast. I would love to hear from you as well. And if there's anything that you want to mention, or if there are any events in your area, or if there's anything you've seen or coming out, please feel free to pass them this way, and I'll be more than happy to put them on the show. Okay, let's get right to the interview. And right on time, my trusty werewolf, Lawrence. He hasn't been here in a while, and he has some time off. And, I asked him, what was it that werewolves do during their time off? And he said he wanted to go to London. I said he was being cliche. Anyway, Lawrence will take you deep inside the Graveyard Show. It was stupid. Lawrence will take you deep inside the Graveyard Show podcast archives, where we will find my interview with author Kim Paffenroth. The time, July 23rd, 2009. The place, Graveyard Show podcast number 30. I will be here right when you return. Safe travels. Kim Paffenroth is an associate professor of religious studies at Iona College in New York, but more importantly is the author of the book Gospel of the Living Dead, which takes a look at George Romero's visions of hell on earth from his films Night, Dawn, Day, and Land of the Dead. And Kim now joins me in the graveyard. Kim, thank you for being here.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So let's talk a little bit about you, Kim. What got you interested, first off, in pursuing religious studies?
I was actually raised as a non-believer, even I think rather active atheism on my father's part. But I suppose, although that was certainly a big part of my outlook in my life for the first half of my life, another part of it that he very much inculcated in me, and I suppose that stuck just as much or even more, was real skepticism. So even though perhaps I grew up with an atheistic outlook for the first half of my life, I was as skeptical of that as I was of other things as well. So eventually, I turned to other things, and it was later in life. It was in college, when we were actually studying religion, or not studying religion, but we were studying religious texts. The Bible, Dante, Luther, Kierkegaard. And I became fascinated with those, and I became fascinated with the worldview that they offered. And I suppose, to kind of be blunt from a contemporary American perspective, I became interested in the worldview that they offered me that was, I suppose, different than how I'd been raised to think this is what a Christian believes, this is how a Christian acts, because I was raised with a lot of the stereotypes, and a lot of contemporary Christians, of course, reinforce a lot of the stereotypes of what modern evangelical Christianity is. So to go back to the original text, I suppose, was a very, in a way, liberating experience for me, and got me more interested in that aspect of it, in the original and in the background of it. So that's what I pursued in graduate school for really most of the late 80s into the mid 90s. That was my life.
Is it really an intensive study? I mean, is it something that really? I mean, when you hit the books on religious studies, I mean, is it as intense as I think it might be?
It is, and it is again something that I think all of us in religious studies have to remind ourselves of. Studying it is different than practicing it.
Sure.
And many of us, of course, who study it also practice it. But I think we have to constantly remind ourselves when we meet and when we interact and converse with people for whom this is not an object of academic study, they're just coming at it from a completely different perspective. And again, especially with my perspective as kind of a late convert and not somebody being raised with it, that's another aspect I have to remind myself, that somebody who's been raised in religious tradition right from birth and baptism and has never studied it as an academic discipline, they're not going to be looking at these texts and at these questions the same way I do. They may not even quite understand. I mean, it's a very frequent reaction that people would say, why do you want to study that? Don't you just sort of believe that, or isn't that, or even what makes me cringe even more, I suppose, isn't that just something you sort of feel? It's like, well, of course there's an emotive aspect to it and component, but I try to bring a more rational, analytical side to it.
Sure.
While again reminding myself that that's not the whole picture. Which I think is again a problem that scholars have, that we kind of get locked into our own little worldview and our own little box, and we don't understand that there are other people doing this in quite different ways.
So, how long did it take you to receive your PhD?
Not as long as some people, thankfully. And of course, some people never finish. It is a very, I suppose, a big part of the process is to weed people out and to just kind of wear people down till they give up. Which is terrible to say, but it does work. I mean, most of the people I started with didn't finish; they did drop out. So let's see, I started in '88, I finished in '95, so 7 years from the time I graduated college till the time I got a PhD.
Okay. So, what is a nice guy like you doing in a genre like this? Yeah. Well,
that's it's funny since temporally. Well, it's hard to say. Temporally, I suppose the zombies come in first, but then there's sort of a long hiatus for them.
Yeah.
Like I think like practically every male my age. And I didn't ask at the beginning what your age was, but let's assume that you're close, since you seem to be interested in the same kinds of movies. For every male our age, I don't know. You saw those Dawn of the Dead commercials with the hands coming through the opening elevator doors.
How?
And you were just hooked.
How did you know that? You know what? And here's the thing. I was in an elevator yesterday.
Yeah. Every time you're in an elevator,
yes,
you're thinking.
Yes, and I'm like, as I get in the elevator, I'm like, oh yeah, wow.
You're thinking, oh shit, I wish I had a gun.
Yeah. Like, what if this door opens and the zombies come right at me? That is the one thing about that Dawn of the Dead commercial that has always stuck with me, and obviously you too, is the zombies coming straight at you. Yeah. And
that was very, very simple direct camera work in that one moment, but I was hooked. I was hooked. So, I mean, I think for most of us, that's in our background, and I suppose you either outgrow it or you don't, or something else happens to it.
Sure.
And I should preface or sidebar this by saying, I'm sure there's all sorts of things from 1979 that I did outgrow, my hairstyle or my clothes or whatever. But there are some things that I didn't, I guess, ever fully give up on. So, for example, I just came back from a Judas Priest concert last night.
Nice.
So some things, they stick with you.
Of course.
In a very, again, I suppose. Okay, so to tie the two together, some things stick with you in a very sort of intuitive. Well, this goes back to my comments on religion, in a very emotional kind of way. Right? So I can remember being not so much terrified of that movie, but just sort of filled with a sort of a morbid fascination and a kind of dread. I mean, I think that's what that movie really exudes. Like, oh my God, I'm going to be trapped in this place. I'm not going to be able to get out. There's going to be all these things there waiting for me. So, I mean, that certainly was part of my, nightmarish subconscious kind of world that was built into my early adolescence. But then I did grow up and get interested in other things, religion and girls and all sorts of other things. And I kind of forgot about zombies probably for most of the 80s and 90s. And then that Dawn of the Dead remake commercial started coming on. And I don't know if those struck you as vividly, and I know some people didn't like the remake as much. But for whatever reason of whatever cable company we're with, I was just getting bombarded with those Dawn of the Dead remake commercials with the numbers ticking down.
Yep. Okay.
So-and-so Wisconsin population, 249,000, click. And again, I was just like, oh my God, this is it. I got to see this. And I was thrilled all over again, or I was fascinated all over again with that movie. Now, in the intervening 20 years, I'd acquired some, I would hope, maturity, but also intellectual tools, intellectual and analytical tools and lenses through which to see these movies and through which to say something other than, what you say when you're 13, which is like, oh, zombies are cool, right? So I could say something a little more than that.
Yeah.
And it, again, by that point in my life, by 2004, that was kind of my normal approach to something, whether it was the Bible or Shakespeare or even just my regular day-to-day interactions with people. My normal approach was to analyze it, break it down, see what's really going on, try to say something intelligent, and try to unpack it, really, in a way, try to unpack its meaning for myself, and hopefully even to present it in a way that other people would understand. So that's where the analysis then came to bear on the zombie flicks.
Mm-hmm. So your book, which we'll be getting into in just a minute, Gospel of the Living Dead, for those that have not read it, I think that once you start hearing this interview, you're going to go find it, and after a little bit, we'll ask him where you can get it. So Gospel of the Living Dead is the book that you wrote. How long did it take you to write this book?
You know, people always ask me that. It's always hard because, especially if you're a professor, you're usually doing other things. You know, you're not ever a full-time author. I don't write 40 hours a week, except hopefully during the summers for part of the time. So, you know, I can't tell you how many 40-hour weeks it would take. I suppose from conception to finish, and the finish was partly held up by waiting for the DVD of Land of the Dead to come out so that I could have that in front of me.
Sure.
And put at least the last installment in. So I suppose I started thinking of it when I saw the Dawn of the Dead remake. So that's 2004. And I was waiting for the Land of the Dead DVD in fall of 2005. So, yeah, year and a half.
Okay. And lots of movie viewing.
You know, that was part of the fun part. Again, I always tried to sit down and just watch it through without pausing, so I had the effect that it would have on you. And then, you know, then it was a very, very slow process of going through it a second time with the remote control in hand and pausing it really every couple minutes.
I was going to say, yeah, I can't even imagine. It must have taken you days to get through some of these movies.
The second viewing is definitely days long.
Yeah.
Not an hour and a half. Yeah.
Now, with the original Dawn of the Dead, I'm assuming that you watched it on DVD. Did you watch the multi-disc version?
You know, in terms of, you mean like directors, extras, and interviews and stuff?
Yeah, and also, did you watch the European version? And you know, No.
Okay. I didn't sit through all the extras.
Okay.
And I was going to say, in general, older movies, the directors, the extras on older movies are usually not quite as elaborate and well put together as they are in new movies, because of course new movies now are expecting to put that on the DVD.
Sure. Yeah.
Though I do have to say, sometimes asking the director is not always the best place to go, you know, and definitely not asking actors what they were thinking in a certain scene, because they really don't. I mean, I shouldn't laugh, but it's something where, again, they're doing it as a craft and an art and something that they're extremely good at, but I don't think they can necessarily articulate what they were going for in a certain scene.
Sure.
So I apologize. I haven't necessarily seen all the extras.
No, just curious, actually. You know, because I know, you know, because it made me actually go back and watch the European version of Dawn, which I had never sat through as many years as I've had the DVD sitting here. And well, we'll talk about that when we get to Dawn of the Dead. I won't spoil anything, and I'm not going to surprise you with anything either. So you get this idea to write the book. You do the research. You're writing it. I'm just curious, did you mention it to any of your peers that you were working on this book? And if you did, what was their reaction?
You know, I'm still, and this goes even more now that I've moved on into even writing fiction, zombie-related fiction. I suppose the main reaction is still sort of bemused or curious.
Yeah.
So I haven't gotten anything negative, at least not openly. I don't know or necessarily want to know what people think about me privately, but
you and me both. I don't want to know.
Yeah, exactly. It's better just not just smile and nod.
Exactly.
And nod.
Yeah.
We'll work on that. That's a perfectly fine superficial level.
Exactly.
But I do think the way has been paved with a lot of work that works on pop culture and either its religious or philosophical meaning and underpinnings. You know, maybe not long, but several years before I did this, and partly where I got the idea that, maybe I could do this, was the series of books that have come out, even from quite different publishers now, that take some form of, well, there is a series called Blank and Philosophy, where the blank is filled in by some pop culture topic, be it Spider-Man, NASCAR, Buffy, Harry Potter, whoever. And there's quite a few. There's not quite as many, but there's a few on the religious side that have the form of the title that I took: The Gospel According to, Harry Potter, Star Wars, Tolkien, Narnia, whatever. And again, from that list, you can see, okay, some of these books were very consciously trying to be religious, like Narnia, like Lewis. Some were maybe trying, but were terribly elusive about it, like Tolkien. And maybe some are trying in a way, but aren't quite doing it according to some people's version of what Christianity is supposed to be. And I'd say that's where Harry Potter falls in. This is one of the most intensely and straightforwardly moralistic tales out there. Very compatible with Christian morality, but a lot of Christians look at it and say, "Oh, it's got magic, got sorcery. Can't watch this. Can't look at this. Bad stuff." So there's a good deal of that going on, in terms of bringing academic analyses to pop culture, and as kind of a segue to letting people begin to think about philosophical, theological categories, and also trying to make those academic disciplines relevant. If I'm always sitting around, thinking about Heidegger or something else that nobody's ever thought of or read or maybe was forced to read in college once, I'm kind of, compartmentalizing my life, my intellectual life, to where I can only talk to my peers. But if I can tell somebody why zombies or some other pop culture icon of theirs, why this might be more than just entertaining, why it might actually be interesting, it might actually say something, well, then it seems to me I have a larger audience and more of a dialogue that I can have with people.
Yeah, why do you think it is that there are times when horror and religion collide?
I can think of several scenarios. I guess I'll go for the basic one that ties in with zombies the most. They both deal in one way or another with our fears of death, and not just of death in the sense of like physical annihilation or even in the sense of pain, but as I tried to bring out in the book, and as I think better forms of horror, and I would hope better forms of religion try to focus on, they bring out our fear that not just of physical, biological, stopping breathing kind of death, but they bring out our fears of, what if my life was meaningless? Yeah. What if I lived and it just didn't matter? I mean, that much more sense of dread, of angst, of anxiety, of ennui. We have all these different German and French and Latin words that we can throw at it, but a deeper sense of horror at existence. Because, again, after a certain age, you do, I know we don't ever fully get used to the idea that, one day I'm going to stop breathing and that's going to be it. But we get sort of used to that idea. It's in the background. But we do for a much longer part of our lives, I think, we think, oh boy, I'm going to be a big deal. I'm going to make a big splash. I'm going to, people love me. I'm going to be very effective and very influential in what I do. And not really. And you either get terrified of that, and I think that's part of horror, or you hopefully put it into some larger worldview, and that tries to be religion and give you some context whereby you can say, okay, I do still matter in some way, or I can matter.
Yeah, it is interesting because I found that as the years have gone by, certainly perspectives do change, and yeah. Maybe not so much looking at your own mortality, but you do look at how your life is very differently when you're in your teens, your 20s, your 30s, your 40s. You don't think it's going to happen, but it does happen. Sure. And I do think there are, while we who have the older perspective, I suppose, can remember what it was like to be a teen. Yeah. Again, you don't have to go for horror examples. My gosh, Catcher in the Rye. That just blew me away when I was 14. I read it again in, I guess, my 30s, and was like, meh, and I wouldn't even bother now because I just know it would be terribly disappointing. Yeah. So you harken back to that, and you understand what was of interest or what was of more interest to you back then, but not just your tastes, but your outlook does change. And as we were
chatting a little bit before the interview, you know, I mean, in terms of, it doesn't really surprise me that I wouldn't necessarily like the newest crop of horror movies, because I assume those are geared towards an 18-year-old audience.
Sure.
So I'm just not going to quite be in tune with that.
Yeah, and I've kind of go into that the same way myself. It's like, I know that it's, and especially, you know, again, from our perspective, a lot of films now that we've seen, we kind of get the story, you know what's going to happen, and as you see, either whether it's a remake or original, it doesn't matter, you start to see the formula, and you go, oh, okay, I've already been down this road, you know, once or 100 times, and it's like, oh, what's the big deal? Whereas maybe, you know, somebody who's new to the genre, or maybe somebody who's, you know, doesn't really watch it, and they see these new movies, they're like, oh wow, that's great, and you know, that's great for them. But yeah, for us, it certainly does have a different perspective or different meaning when we see these films.
Right, and you don't want to ruin it for the younger person. I mean, I assume in a review you could point out that this thing is formulaic, you know, for other people. But yes, there's an inevitable temptation to be like the cranky old man on the porch.
Yeah.
With a cane, just yelling at people.
Yeah, exactly. I don't want to be that grumpy old man, Kim.
No, it's just not very effective.
No, it isn't. It's not effective. It's not fun. Well, let's get into your book, Gospel of the Living Dead, because I know that's what all the zombie fans out there really, really want to get into. The introduction alone of this book, for me, could take up multiple shows to talk about, so I'll try to narrow it down as best I can. Let's talk about one of the things that you mentioned that Romero does, and that is that he asks us what a smart zombie is. And the answer may be us, which I would say that's a pretty scary answer.
Yep. Again, it has to do with, I think, an explanation of why he is an artist and not just a craftsman of gore, you know. And he is that, you know, or at least Savini is, I guess, a craftsman of gore. And that is part of the storytelling technique, and an integral part. I mean, I really do think the visceral reaction to those movies is part of the message. You know, that you do you have to, and you're supposed to feel nauseous when you watch those things. But it seems like there's lots of people who can fling blood and viscera around and make that effect on people. Where I think he steps beyond that is with this identification of the zombie with humanity, so that the zombie is not just a threat to my breathing, right?
Yeah.
There's any number of things that could be that, and there's any number of movies that do that, right? I mean, how many movies do you have people being attacked by whatever, alligators, turtles, moths? I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, whatever's going to kill you and eat you. Yep. And again, the killing's pretty scary. Being eaten's a little extra scary because it, you know, kind of gross and might take a while and, you know, stuff like that. And just has a basic reaction, probably going back to our, you know, primal memory of once having lived in the jungles and been chased and eaten by things. But that next level, that you could become the monster. And you get this some, obviously, with vampires, but where I think, again, the zombies ramp it up more than the vampires, is that there's almost always, some vampire authors obviously want to play around with this, but there's almost always a sense in which it's desirable to be a vampire. Right? Yeah. They're often sexy. Yep. Even if they're not sexy, they at least seem to have cognition, right? They seem to be of human intellect. They seem to remember their previous lives. Yep. They can read books and go to movies, and as long as it's at night, and you know they can lead a normal life, except for that whole killing and drinking people's blood thing. Yep. So it's really not totally a bad deal. Yeah. Whereas if you're a zombie, it's all downside, right? You're just going to wander around in a daze, just with this insatiable hunger.
Kind of sounds like my normal day.
And then that's the next part. That's the next part of the punchline.
Yeah.
Is that that's what I was doing when I went to the mall and wandered around, just drooling over whatever the hell it is I drool over, whether it's high-end electronics or never mind the mall. My God, it's invaded our homes now. You watch a show like, it's actually from Britain of all places, where you'd think people are more sophisticated, but what is that one that they Top Gear?
Oh yes, yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I mean, my God, that is the ultimate hardware and vehicle porn, right? I'm just going to sit here and look at stereos and cars that I could never in a million years afford.
Yeah.
And just kind of be mesmerized by it.
Like,
who's the zombie?
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And somewhere Romero's laughing.
Oh my gosh. He's got that naughty sense of humor, which again is, I think, a big part of it. If you played all this stuff terribly seriously, I don't know how well it would go over.
Yeah.
But I think he has that sort of scampish humor, which then, of course, in a tribute like Shaun of the Dead, could be just taken to the next step, and we'll just make it slapstick.
Sure.
But still with the biting kind of satire, in a sort of black humor sort of way.
Well, now in the one portion of your introduction, you had a piece called Symbols and Meanings, and you were talking about that symbols and meaning of zombies. It's very interesting. You talk about that there are beings that straddle the boundary of being human and the divine, and on the one side you have angels and saints, and you mentioned Jesus and Buddha, but then when you turn and you go to the other side of that would be zombies. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I mean, throwing out technical terms doesn't usually help too much, but there's a nice handy word that we use called liminal. There are these liminal beings. A liminal being means that it's right on the edge.
Okay.
It's right on the edge between two states that we regard as mutually exclusive. So, as you say, divine and human, living and dead, good and evil.
Yep.
Right. These are so they, whatever they are, whether we ultimately decide they're good or they're evil, they're troubling because they don't fit quite right. They don't fit they throw our categories into a disarray. And another thing that we learn about ourselves is that we're terribly invested in categories. They make our lives not just simpler, but they make our lives livable, right? If I know if I know where to put people and things in my thought world and in my real world, in general, things go much better, things go smoother, not even just that, but things become livable, right? I have to know that, trash goes in the trash can and food goes in the refrigerator, and I don't confuse those two things. Oh, and but then, of course, I get into those liminal states, right? So when I put the chicken on the counter, well, the chicken's food, and that's good. But, oh, wait a minute, I got to bleach the counter afterwards because now the stuff the chicken left on the counter, that ain't food. That's bad for me. That's going to hurt me. So there's all these confusions begin to get thrown into our categories. Now, again, that's a terribly mundane example of your chicken blood there, but it's one of those quirky little reminders of how really, as much as we love and need our categories, they're constantly breaking down. They're constantly betraying us in that way, to where food becomes poison in that case, right? Or food becomes a toxin.
Sure.
Okay, so I would suggest, whatever you think about Jesus or Buddha or any of these things, they do throw your world, if you really believe that they are what they say they are, or what other people think and say they are, if you really believe that, they do throw your world into a disarray. You can't look at the world the same way and say, oh no, I'm just going to keep on living the way I did. It does somehow shatter categories. Now again, if corpses get up and walk around and try to kill you, your world is suddenly upside down. Again, captured hilariously, if you remember in Land of the Dead. It's one of my favorite lines, definitely from that movie, maybe from any of them. One of the henchmen says to the evil Dennis Hopper character, says some words to the effect of, oh, you're in trouble now, or we're in trouble, whatever it is. And Hopper says, in a world where the dead walk, trouble really loses much of its meaning. And that's right. He's absolutely correct. The world is turned upside down. What do you mean trouble? How much more trouble do we need or can we possibly imagine than corpses getting up and walking around?
Yeah.
So, no, it's not really trouble, actually, at all. Okay, so did that get somewhere on the liminal creatures, or liminal beings, I should say, because some are creatures and some are just beings.
Now, as we were just talking about with zombies, and vampires, and also when you look at werewolves in your intro, you talk about how with zombies, since they are not superhuman, it makes them even more dangerous.
It makes them dangerous in a different way. It makes them dangerous in a different way. And again, this goes back to the other question about them being us. It makes them dangerous in the way that usually people are dangerous. In other words, zombies are only dangerous in a herd when they are behaving as people often do. We tend to congregate together, and we believe in teamwork and all this good stuff, and that's how we've accomplished all the things we've accomplished as a species. Well, lo and behold, we see sort of a perverted, degenerate version of that in the zombies. One-on-one, they're nothing.
Yep.
No, any able-bodied person can kill a zombie, but like us, they have this drive to congregate and herd together, and then they do become the horde. They do become the unstoppable force that they are depicted as in the movies. So they are this terribly mundane animal or creature, this terribly mundane monster, which again goes back to, which also in some of the fiction and movies, but especially the fiction, since you sometimes get an internal point of view, it makes them, again, like us, right? They're just terribly ordinary. I can, in a way, even though I might aspire to be a vampire, because that's cool, I identify more with the zombie, right? I mean, he's just shuffling around doing his thing, right? And that's kind of what I do. So he's much more like me than the vampire is. I really don't get the vampire. He's way beyond me.
Sure.
He's a very aristocratic, powerful monster.
Yep. An immortal that has gathered all this information over the years that they've lived.
Right, might have an army going,
sure,
or whatever.
Yeah.
Plotting to take over the world. I mean, zombies, that's the funny thing, right? Zombies are taking over the world, but they're not plotting to do so.
Yeah, they're just doing it. Yeah. They are really the ultimate sort of average, they're the average Joe monster. And that's one of the things that you mentioned towards the end of the introduction, is that zombies accomplish what all the other monsters can accomplish.
Yes, they do win, yes.
Yeah, they take over the world. Which is, when you think about it, you're like, yeah, you know what? Dracula didn't. Frankenstein didn't. The Mummy didn't. Creature from the Black Lagoon didn't. Godzilla didn't even do it. And it's like, here are these zombies which just kind of walk around mindlessly. They are able to do that. It's pretty scary stuff when you think about it.
It is scary, and again, it reflects back on us. We have kind of taken over the world, but I don't know. I suppose are we going to do anything ultimately that much more interesting than just shuffle around?
Sure.
Would be the existential question way to put it. Or I suppose if you wanted to put it in the terror apocalyptic manner, you could say, well, we have sort of, through maybe dogged perseverance and a bunch of accidents, we've taken over the world. But, some perfectly stupid thing might come along like a virus and take over the world from us. And that would be the end of us. And all our brains and all our technology isn't really going to do much of anything. I mean, that's actually should have mentioned that more in the introduction. It's amazing how low tech zombies make the world.
Sure.
Right. Immediately, as soon as they take over, the technology is more or less out the window.
Yeah.
The power grid goes down. You haven't got it, and Max Brooks does a great job of this in World War Z. Power grid goes down. No more internet. No more. High-tech weapons don't do shit against them. And suddenly you're reduced to beating these things to death.
Yeah.
So again, all our technology has really gone out the window, or in some of the versions of the story, of course, has caused the thing, right? Because there's some sort of bioterror engineered thing, like in 28 Days Later.
And that's the thing, is that a lot of apocalyptic films, obviously not zombie related, it's usually nature destroys us. The atomic bomb destroys us, especially back in the 50s through the 80s. It was always the nuclear bomb, giant monsters. And here, you don't have that. It's real simple. It's corpses that are just doing it, and it's slowly and silently, yet very effectively.
It's going. On the one hand, it's a very 21st century fear because we can kind of slip in the bioterror subtext if we want in some of the stories. But you're right. It's also a deeply human fear just of corpses. You know, I mean, and of death in general, but also really just of the physical presence of death.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, unless you're an EMS or a doctor or a mortician or something, you just don't see that many corpses in your life. You know, you go to a handful of funerals, and it's very controlled and very structured how you interact with the corpse. And I think that really does show our terrible, and this goes back to some of the comments about liminal too, our terrible ambivalence about the thing.
Yeah.
Right? It's grandma, and I loved her, and I have all these fond feelings, but this thing in front of me I'm terrified of at the same time.
Yeah. And you bring up a really good point, and I think that this is kind of one of the things that we as the viewers probably gloss over because the films don't really dwell on it. You have moral dilemmas, and also how zombies really do bastardize, as you say in the book. It bastardizes the grieving process.
Yeah, I mean, the only place where I think the door was opened on that by Romero, and it's funny how we all it's almost as though all of us who work in the field, we have to like pay homage to him, right? Mm-hmm. So we have to show where all our ideas somehow come from him and they somehow fit the canon. Mm-hmm. It's almost sort of religious in that way.
Yeah.
And at the same time, you have to say, oh well, but I'm doing something new. So you have this very ambivalent kind of attitude towards him. Where he left the door open for that was in Dawn when Peter has to kill Roger. I mean that seems like, boy, this is wrong. This is really, I shouldn't be killing my friend. I should be grieving for him.
Yeah.
But it is I mean, again, it's an idea of reducing us to, I don't know, not even animal status, monstrous status, that we would have to behave with such utter callousness and just mechanized bullet to the head every time.
And you cite well in your text as well that as we get later in the Romero films, up until Land, which your book covers, how the terms are used, putting down, what else did they say? They use terms basically that we would use for animals, or
Yeah, exterminate.
Yeah.
Put down. What else? And there's another vermin type of.
And how even especially now, a scene comes to mind in Land when Asia Argento kills one of Dennis Hopper's guys that he sends out with them as soon as he gets bitten, and she asks, how long does it normally take? And he's like, a few hours, and she turns around, she's like, sorry, and she just blows him away. As we get later in the movies, there is more of a taking action now, as opposed to the original Dawn of the Dead, where it's like, they wait for Roger to turn, even though they know, and it's not even like he gets to a point where he can help them. It's after that point when he's basically immobile and he's just living out the last hours of his life. They let him die. Very different, perspective as we get later on in this series.
Yeah, and I do think I mean, Dawn has a terribly ambiguous phrase and character that lurks with the one-legged priest in the basement.
Yes.
Who says to them, we have to give up violence, and it's never clear what exactly is meant by that.
Yeah.
It's like, well, how can we in this world? And yet that seems to be the challenge he puts before them. As I don't know what to call it other than a challenge. It's never taken up in the film.
Yep.
Except that I suppose, when the biker gang gets into the mall and ruins everything for everybody, either themselves or for the people in the mall, it's shown that this kind of human violence gets us nowhere.
Ironically enough, that's my next question, because if there's anything that I think that these films show, we're really good at fighting each other, even when there's a threat out there, which usually, usually hear, people gather together when there's a common threat.
Yep.
And people cite, remember the Reagan speech back in, I guess it was 82 or so, when he was like, when he was pitching Star Wars, was the famous speech he gave about, imagine if aliens came to this planet, we would all get together and we would band together and our differences wouldn't matter because we're human. And you would think that in these zombie films, the humans would band together and fight for survival and stay together. Instead, Night of the Living Dead, you have turmoil in the house. Dawn of the Dead, as you just mentioned, you have the biker gang coming in. In Day of the Dead, you have the army versus the medical staff. And then in Land, you have the team within itself fighting, as well as you have, the upper class versus the lower class.
Yes. He's, except for that final gesture in Land, he is a very... He retains his cynicism, I think, throughout the series, and I don't quite know what to make of Diary.
Yeah.
I can't think of anything there, even that in a way, I suppose it's more sad. The only thing where he starts to undo his cynicism. Well, no, I can give you two.
Uh-huh.
And they do seem to me the two finest gestures in his movies, and this may just be about me, and how when it comes to cynicism, I'm sort of a poser. I'm really not that cynical. I talk the talk, but I don't walk the walk.
Yeah.
The end of Dawn.
Yep.
The end of Dawn is weirdly uplifting.
Yeah.
These two people, interracial couple. She's pregnant by someone else. They don't have much gas in the helicopter, but they're free. They're free of them all. They're free of the zombies. And, you can't help but imagine, I don't think you can help but imagine that it's going to turn out good somehow.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know you can imagine all sorts of worse things happening.
Sure, yeah.
It's deliberately left in that kind of limbo that he's not gonna show you them being killed, even though I'm sure you know the ending that they'd originally intended.
Actually, I don't.
Okay, maybe we can
talk about that in our next show.
A specific discussion.
Yes.
On, but anyway.
Yeah, because we'll definitely talk about that in our next show. Definitely.
The way it ended up on screen is weirdly uplifting. I think that's how everybody describes it.
Especially with the music, because even at the, because you have that sort of like 70s sounding, happy, like you're okay. You're up in the air. The zombies are off doing their thing. Life is okay.
And then you cut back to the mall with the zombies and the Muzak.
Yeah.
And you're kind of happy that they're out of there because that's just sort of stupid. You don't want to be there. I mean, that gesture and the gesture at the end of Land, where Big Daddy and
yes,
help me out with the main character. Australian.
Yes. I want to say Thomas Jane, and I know it's not Thomas Jane. I know who you're talking about.
Oh, but even the character's name. I was just trying to get the character's name.
It was. Oh gosh, Blake. Was it Blake? Yeah, I can't remember. But when he looks at Big Daddy through the binoculars, and they look at each other, and and Asia Argento wants to. She's like, "Are we gonna, kill him?" And he's like, "Let him go. They're just looking for a place to live."
They're looking for a place to live, and we're gonna go off to Canada.
Yep.
Yeah. The movie's filmed in Canada.
Yeah.
And we're the big tough United States, and we've been dragged down, and now we have to run off and hide in Canada. Yeah. I mean, that sort of is a running theme in movies now. I mean, that was really hilarious. I thought in The Day After Tomorrow.
Oh.
Where we all have to run and hide in Mexico.
Oh my
because
gosh.
the United States, due to our idiocy, the United States has been turned into one giant glacier.
Yeah.
And now the very Cheney-esque vice president is speaking to us from Guadalajara or whatever.
Yeah.
in a parka, saying, "Well, our wonderful neighbors to the south are going to help us out here."
Yeah.
So here that reverses it to the Canadians. But at any rate, those two gestures do seem to be like. I mean, there's again, as my joking comments about the U.S. point to. They're still so cynical and pessimistic about the future of American empire.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I do think from 68 up to 2009 or however long he lives, and may he live a long time, I think Romero's going to beat that drum right to the end.
Yeah.
That American empire is corrupt, it's shot, and it's not leading anywhere except to a higher and higher body count and more inhumanity and degradation towards other people. I do think he's going to beat that forever.
He is Kim Paffenroth. He is the author of the book, Gospel of the Living Dead. Now, we're done with our interview right now, but Kim is going to join me again on next week's podcast, and we're going to get into the meat of the matter. We're going to talk about Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. So definitely come back next week to hear more with Kim. So Kim, we've got a lot more talking to do, so just stand by, and we'll talk to you again next week.
Thanks so much for having me.
It was good having Kim on the show, and hopefully this piqued your curiosity as the conversations that we will have very soon regarding Night, Dawn, Day, and Land of the Dead. Those of you that are Romero zombie fans, you will not be disappointed, and you can still get this book. It is available, and of course the obvious place to go for that would be Amazon.com. And well, you know the title of the book by now. I don't need to say it again. Kim has also since then written other books as well, zombie fiction that you can check out as well if that's something you're a fan of. In the meantime, I am going to try to get these next two interviews up sooner than later, considering I took 4 or 5 months off in between shows. So I will try to jam these out quickly so this way you have something to chew on. Again, the email address is gyspodcast@gmail.com. GYS, Graveyard Show, gyspodcast@gmail.com. Always look forward to hearing from you. Likes, dislikes, anything that you might have to suggest, etc., etc., etc. In the meantime, my friends, I will see you very soon. And as you exit the graveyard, I would like to remind you to please lock the gate behind you. We wouldn't want anyone to get out. Until next time.